Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality, and is about discovering your place in this great universe, from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guest, in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life, and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight, in the deep heart of summer, yes, hurricane season here in the Deep South. My time of denial, my time of adventure and stories, perhaps maybe pulling up a good book. That's what we'll be talking about today. We're into Summer Read 2023, and I have a fantastic book here today. It's all about the Deep South. The book is called Swamped. It's by Ken Wells and Hillary Wells. What I loved about the book is it really took me on an adventure. After living here in the South for so many decades, it brought back a lot of times storytelling, how we used to hear from our mamas or papas, and they would tell us their stories, or some of the relatives would come over and say, hey, let me tell you about this, let me tell you about that. And we just don't do that anymore. We're missing the stories. We don't really know just how far can we be pushed. How strong are we? Can we really survive in the swamp? Really, what is it all about? You know, these days, people are just driving down the highway and passing it by, and you never even notice. Others are saying, oh, that's somebody else's job. That's too hard. I'm not going to go do that. And still others move away and say, that's not part of me anymore. That's just my history. What we're going to be talking about today is how to engage in a delightful adventure for all ages, definitely for the elders to be able to say, hey, let's read this book together, and then I'll tell you my stories. Or for the young adults, perhaps, to pick it up and say, wow, I never knew that stuff kind of existed. Maybe I need to go on an adventure. What's in my backyard? So Ken and Hillary, thank you so much for joining me today. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Well, thanks for having us, Dr. Jeanette. Sure.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad to have you both because I just loved this book. I mean, like, Ken, you know, I've sent you so many emails. It's like, I want to do what I want to do. Let's do it. And here we are in hurricane season doing the book, right?
Yeah. A time of dread and a time of cautious optimism that maybe, you won't get slimed again. Let's hope.
Yeah, really. But don't you think truly the book Swamped is that things can't be erased from the face of the earth? There are things that leave history markers, just as a shed in the woods or something like a small camp on the back bay or whatever. Those things are still remnants and they're still there. So we really can't always wash away our history, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, if we're talking about hurricanes in particular, yes, they have an awesome power. I've been in hurricanes. I've covered the aftermath of hurricanes, and it humbles us humans. When finally we're faced with something that we really have no control over. It's the power is just awesome.
Yeah. What I think your book, Swamped, is all about let's just see how much of an adventure we can go on, but also, too, to see about the human spirit, to be able to see what's in your backyard, and to be able to pay attention and say, this is an exciting world in which we are living in. Don't you think many people just drive through the bayous, they drive down through the swamps, hey, they get on the interstate and they're good to go? I mean, everybody knows I-10, I-12, and that seems to be where we're living these days. Do you think?
Well, the lucky thing for Hillary and I is that we grew up in the swamp with curious parents who took us into the swamp. So we had firsthand experience, and not simply driving by. And I think you're totally right about how oblivious so many people down there are of this fundamentally magnificent ecosystem that we have lived in all these years. It's the seventh. Louisiana estuary is the seventh largest wetland on Earth, and it is certainly a scenic and wildlife and bird-rich rival to the Florida Everglades, which is much better known. And of course, Hillary has had some experience in fishing with her dad, and she should talk about that.
Yeah, and I think too, a sentiment that I know I've heard my Uncle Ken say before, and something that I've felt as well. I mean, we've both moved away. I'm living back in Louisiana now, but we've both moved away, and I know that something my Uncle Ken has said before is like the further you get away from it, the more you appreciate it, because there is truly just nothing else like it. And I think a couple years ago, some friends of mine from LA and I came down and we shot this show, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later, but being able to bring like a camera crew here and have people here that are seeing all of it with fresh eyes. I mean, I think I definitely always appreciated it as a kid. Like Uncle Ken said, I grew up, on the water all the time with my dad. He's a real big fisherman in these parts of the world. But yeah, being able to like come down here with people who have never seen it and watch all of them experience it with fresh eyes. And I also work in film, so I get to see people do that pretty often and like come down here to capture this beauty that I think that so many of us who live down here do take for granted. And if you're not like a sportsman like my dad is, or like I had the pleasure of being growing up, I think it's something that's easy to take for granted. You just pass it, you see it, and you don't realize just how absolutely rich it is.
Yeah, I mean, when you go from, Kenner by the airport up to Baton Rouge, you see the sign of Atchafalaya Basin, and it's like, well, what is that? And if you notice, there's a distinct difference. I mean, now we are just post-Ida that went straight up that way. There's not even an animal on the road for roadkill anymore. And I'm going, what the heck? Why is there no gator or possum? Why is there nothing out here? There's no deer on the side of the road. There's where the pelicans go, nothing is there anymore. So I think truly about your book, Swamped, you really share a lot of the details of the swamp and the adventures and what is there, could potentially be there, because they are slowly shifting and going away, don't you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the characters of the book is the swamp, and we wrote it that way in a way to just to say that, I think in South Louisiana, particularly in terms of the ecosystem, it's one of the rare places on Earth where the culture is almost inseparable from the landscape. When you think about the Cajuns and Creoles, and the German coasters who came, to this wilderness in the 1720s and 1750s, when there was no infrastructure, had to make their way, and yet, became totally engaged and in love, with the landscape and the ecosystem, and how vibrant and how fertile it was, and they were able to, to not just eke out a living, but survive and then thrive in this system. And I think, one of the things that we try to get at the book is, the chief character, Jack Landry, is a kid. He's a 17-year-old high school kid, but he's been raised by his trapper papa in the ways of the swamp, and appreciates it in ways that most people would not, because he's lived that experience. And one of the dynamics in the book is that even though Jack and Olivia Fitzgerald, the young woman who was in the plane crash with him and survived, even though they're from different worlds, and even though they're stuck in the swamp in the worst possible circumstances, over time, I think you begin to see Olivia coming to see the swamp through Jack's eyes, and at a point where they find some respite, she begins to understand, his kind of total connection to this fabulous ecosystem. And so, in part, to me, that's part of the big takeaway of the plot line, is that it's an ecosystem worth having and restoring and treasuring.
Well, also, too, the idea that you really, when you go into the swamp, you are immersed. It's almost as if you are part of nature. Well, we are supposed to be part of nature. It's not really all different. You see a lot of spiritual people these days. They say, go out and hug a tree and see what it's saying to you. And I'm going, oh, gosh, please go. And because us down here, we're like, we are in it all the time. We're in nature. We are part of it all the time. We can feel and sense things. and know how to keep ourselves going, know when to duck, when to dive, when to be able to say honor and respect whatever's going on in the swamp or the land or the water, whatever it is. But I think sometimes we turn around and we say, but that's just for show. That's just something like they put up on a movie screen. That's something they put in the book. That's something they did otherwise. And I would say, no, this is actually the truth, because every single thing that you wrote in the book, both Ken and Hillary, in the book Swamped, it is how the swamp feels, how it touches you, how it's almost as if it has a personality all its own, and you're just diving in, don't you think?
Oh, definitely. You know, one time I had a friend from California, as Hillary was saying, taking people from the outside, and he had a peculiar occupation. He basically recorded nature sounds and all over the world, and so he wanted to do the swamp. And so I had a friend who had an airboat, and we went deep, deep, deep into the atchafalaya, and then we shut this is night, you know, like midnight, and we shut the airboat off and just sat there. And the biomass, I mean, just between the crickets and the frogs and the ducks and the insects, I mean, it was like this cacophony of nature, and you couldn't believe how many things were alive. And the guy was sitting there with his mic, looking at me, you know, with his mouth open, going, "Oh my God!" You know, I had no idea that such a place even existed. I mean, it really is pretty extraordinary.
Do you think, Hillary, that when you're bringing your friends here and you're sharing this, and it's sort of you get that they kind of can't grasp it? Some people are totally immersed in it, you know, and it's still others see it as, well, how are we going to dress this up? How are we going to make it look different or better, you know, to be able to be acceptable to certain people? Yet the swamp, I think it was so cool. The characters, you know, it was about being all muddy and dirty and gross and maybe not having water, maybe you need to drink that other water that's there. And to truly say, there are parts of it that you can't separate us from that. We're almost born into it. In other words, the existence that you've created for your life is yours. That separation. We're not separated, right?
Right. And, you know, it's really funny. I think a lot of film crews come down here and they want to film the swamp. And like you were saying, they think it's like just this, you know, pretty thing that they've seen on a movie screen. And the reality of the swamp is very different from that, right? I mean, they sort of come in with this false sense of security that, oh, you know, we're just going to go out there and we're going to shoot this stuff and we're going to all be safe. And then they get down here and find out that, you know, you have to have a snake wrangler on set, and if depending on where you are, you probably have to have an alligator wrangler too. And you know, and everybody's got to be covered in 10 layers of bug spray and all these things all the time, because there's this false sense of security and safety of like, oh, well, we're shooting a movie, you know, what could possibly go wrong? And it's like, well, when you're, you know, that deep in the swamp, I mean, what can't go wrong? It's kind of like,
that's right.
I mean, you can read Swamped and find out, but there's a lot that can go wrong. Yeah,
that's right.
You know, I had two friends, Louisiana people who went out improvidently on jet skis into the swamp, and they broke down. And, and night came, and they ended up doing what Jack does in the book, which is, you know, covering themselves in swamp mud, because they were literally being devoured by mosquitoes, and they were hospitalized for like 2 weeks from bug bites. So you know, you don't want to be on the wrong end of the swamp, you know, out there with, you know, no way to get home, you know, no water, no food, no protection against insects. At that point, you really do have to use your cunning and your basic survival instincts.
Yeah. You know, as we always say, the mosquitoes are as big as dinosaurs here. They've been around just as long, too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it's funny because if there's one lone mosquito in this house, it's going to bite me, and boy, it's going to have Thanksgiving. But, you know, we think about it all the time, too, when people say, well, it can't really be like that. And I think sometimes we say we've lost a lot of the elders' stories. What I loved about the book, you talked about Cajuns, Acadians. You put some phrases in there that they would say. And that's what's really missing is that ancient history to keep continuing to stay on. I mean, you know, there's a relative that I have, and the little daughter is taking French, you know, in school. And I'm going, oh, really? What kind of French? And they're like, well, you know, the French like Paris. And I'm going, oh, darn. You mean you're not learning, you know, the French from here? And so I think the time is that, are we willing to be able to pepper our young adults to say, that sounds interesting, even if it's only a few phrases they would pick up. Maybe they would say some respectful and honoring phrases. You all know those. And we would say, well, that's important. Because one day, when they get a little bit older, they might pick up a book. Where did my grandfather come from? Do some ancestry. Turn around and say, can we find some ancient books and restore them? They, in turn, may become the keepers of the history of the swamp and of our people, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. You know, my mother spoke Cajun French, as did her entire extended family. But, you know, I was born into that generation at a time when Cajun French, what people now call Louisiana or colonial French, you know, was derided as some sort of pidgin dialect that was really not authentic French, and people were ashamed. You know, they basically shamed many of the cases and to stop speaking it, and part of that was to try to anglicize them. So I'm the skip generation. You know, my mother did not teach me, but I listened.
Correct.
And so I learned a lot of the idioms. I learned a lot of the cuss words. You know, I could probably hold like a 7-minute conversation. You know, when I listen to French radio out of Lafayette, Cajun French radio, I understand about half of what's being said. So I got some of it. And yes, I mean, part of the premise and the purpose of this book is to remind people that, you know, we have this rich heritage that is something worth, you know, preserving, and that we should continue to talk about it. You know, and I'm happy to say that there are efforts afoot in Louisiana to keep you know, Louisiana French alive, and I think in some pockets, like in places like Lafayette, they're having some success in teaching the young kids, you know, the language as well. So that's a good thing.
So I went to public school in Houma, and I think in first grade we had French, and it was Cajun French, and then it just stopped there. And I think about it all the time because it was like I learned all these basic words, and then, you know, growing up in Houma, you end up with a bunch of words that you don't even realize are Cajun French words that are just in your vocabulary that get thrown around all the time. And honestly, some of those I didn't even know were like so specific to that area until I moved away, and I would say things and people were like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean?
Right.
I'd be like, all right, well, let's go row day. And they're like, what? I'm like, like run errands. And they're like, okay, no one here says that. You just made that word up. I'm like, no, it's a Louisiana thing. But we did have it in, like, I think it was first or second grade, and for whatever reason it ended there, and I'm not sure if they still do it. But I know, I think there's always been, like, you know, some people sort of championing for the cause every step of the way. And I do hope that they continue to do that, and that it really only grows.
Yeah. Well, you know, here in Jefferson Parish, they're closing a lot of the schools now in the year 2023 because they said they don't have the population, so there's a massive migration going on. And what's happening is a lot of the kids are going to online schooling because the schools are not that safe, the ones that are left. So the idea is that now there's going to be, we're seeing, in other words, I almost see like two parallel timelines, one that society is taking in its own evolution, and one that we're really wanting to preserve the nature and the culture and the education of our area. Do you know what I mean? So, but the problem is they are no longer overlapping anymore. They pretty much have, if you step onto that track, you're going a fast track one way or a fast track another way. So I think a lot of the heritage is being lost. A lot of people have, you know, with Hurricane Ida, people have been moving out of the bayou areas because they just cannot, number one, afford the insurance, number one, turn around and fix their houses another time? Or they're just, how many times do we have to do this before it's time to just say, I'm done?
Yeah, there was a story on the wires 3 or 4 days ago that showed Homa was leading the nation in terms of metro areas without migration. So and having Hillary, we're from there, and still, my brothers are still there. Hillary's dad's still there, and I truly believe that every house in Homa that had insurance got a new roof after Ida, because that's how bad the destruction was. It was momentous, and people, it's hurricane fatigue. People are just tired of having to go through this again, and wondering what if the next one is worse. And they were lucky they didn't get water. This is mostly a wind-driven hurricane, but it could have been another Katrina had they gotten the surge. So it is crazy.
Yeah, and since I was the eye of it went over me both times, I'm no longer interested. But I think also too the idea is that when we look at the characters in your book, it truly is about being able to say, somewhere in their senses, they know that they have the skills and the talents and the techniques to be able to survive the swamp. And even your characters, they say, I hear my papa's telling me something. I hear a voice in my head that's saying, get up, go, do. So in other words, there's always these, as they've always said, the ghosts, the spirits, the ancestors that live in those areas, and they still stay there to be able to assist people to live there. Don't you think that's so vitally important to understand, too? People say, oh, well, that's a ghost. We need to banish it. No, you don't. You just need to sit down and listen to it. Maybe they're trying to tell you something to get up and get out of there. Or maybe they're telling you to, hey, plant right here, whatever it might be. So in other words, there's our human existence. There's nature's ecosystem. There's also the energy system of spirits. And all of this is like a beautiful symphony in this area. That's why people say, when I get here, I don't know what it is, but there is an it that I want to have.
I've always been interested in cultures that practice ancestry worship,
right.
And the older I get, the more I sort of understand that. That is, having done my family genealogy and realized that, I had pioneers on both sides of the family who were in America before America got it. It was America. They arrived, and my mother's family arrived in 1721 on the coast of the Mississippi River below New Orleans. And just to think what they went through to survive, to keep the name alive. The more you read these histories of transatlantic crossings at that time, how perilous they were, and how 40% of the people who undertook them died on board. Then you realize that you've inherited some gumption, and so what are you going to do about that? I mean, are you going to use it? Are you going to find a way to spread it? So maybe that's why I'm an optimist. Maybe that's I think the book exudes a certain amount of optimism that even when you think you're done, you're actually not. So.
Yeah. Hillary, what I loved about the book, too, and about the character is that when I turned around and looked, I said, how does this person know to write these kinds of things? I'm thinking, did you all have maybe some past lives here before? Because this may have been your current life, but also, too, you took the characters on an adventure. And perhaps maybe it cloned from your past life experiences, maybe from your elder stories, maybe from you both saying, oh, I feel like I've been there, done that. In other words, when authors write the books, Ken, and they say it almost writes itself. You're drawing that from someplace, right?
Hillary?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that, it's hard for, I guess it's hard for me to know. It's like, is this coming from a past life? Is this coming from, my childhood of growing up in the swamps? Am I pulling from memories? Am I pulling from the family stories, right? Because I do feel lucky. Obviously, that my Uncle Ken is a fantastic storyteller. But, we come from a pretty long line of incredible storytellers. And, I was lucky enough to not lose my grandfather on my dad and Uncle Ken's side until I was like 11 years old. So You know, I just have I have a lot of stories, a lot of memories of my own, a lot of different things to pull from. But then there are those moments, you know, where something does feel like divine inspiration.
Right.
But yeah, so I think it's like an amalgamation of all of those things, really.
Yeah, because at the end of the book, we're not giving away the story. However, it is a wonderful adventure in the swamp. It's sort of like when they get rescued, it's like, whoof, all of a sudden it's almost as if the vortex closed and now they're back to reality, you know? So what did you do? Where did you go? What was it about? Oh, you mean that existed over there, but we're here? You know, you almost see it as truly two different worlds, yes?
Oh yeah. And again, you know, I never quite know where my, you know, wellspring of imagination comes from, but you know, I can say that again, you know, the older I get, the more interested I get in the past lives of, you know, my ancestors and what they did and what they went through, and you know how they sort of brought us and the species forward, and the struggles, but not just the struggles, the triumphs, you know, the things, and so I think out of that, you know, sort of comes this, you know, this need to sort of tell this story which intertwines, you know, this ecosystem, which frankly I think it shows I'm totally in love with the system. I think it's just, you know, one of the great, and you know, I lived in Florida. I explored the Everglades. I've been to the Congo River. You know, I've seen all these magnificent places, and yet every time I come back to Louisiana and set foot in the Atchafalaya, I go, well, you know, this stacks up pretty well with all the magnificent places on Earth that I've had the pleasure of seeing. You know, so to some extent, you know, it's this twinning of the culture with that system that I think really stirs my imagination and wants me to tell stories about it.
It's really a romance novel about the nature system, you know? And, I mean, you really have to fall in love with it. Do you know what I mean? Because if you totally walk around and always negate or say, oh, well, this story, this has all these adventures, it's going to hurt them, it's going to kill them, it's going to take them out. And you're really saying, no, just walk with it and mesh with it, feel it, you know, see what the sense of it is all about. Because sometimes I think we get out in nature and we say, oh, but that's a bad place to be. And, you know, you put all this protection on and you're like, oh, well, let's go step in. But we're just going to look at it through our camera lens. We're just going to look at it, you know, from afar, so to speak. Or maybe we'll put up a couple of drones, you know, and look at it and film it that way. But really, don't you think that, Hillary, it's about being within it, to feel it? It's almost like you have to eat it, you have to feel it, you have to sleep in it. And that's where your two characters says, let's really get down and dirty about it and feel the story.
Absolutely. You know, I think that there is something to be said about being pushed to your limit, you know, and you see the development of these characters through these experiences that they're having. I mean, it's like your worst moments in life, your moments of greatest fear end up showing you who you really are. And as a reader, we find out who Jack and Olivia really are through these extremely tumultuous experiences. And yeah, I mean, it's an adventure, and it's an adrenaline pumping story, right? But you have to just embrace it. You have to feel those things, and it's a story that shows you that feeling those things is productive. It's not something that you should shy away from, right? Like it's a time to be brave and to figure out, you know, what ultimately you're made of.
Yeah, because I think that's so important as a young adult book. In closing, I wanted to touch on this. I think that really this book is about saying, who are you? What are you made out of? How strong are you? What would you like to do, and what would you like to become? You know, this is the world outside of you. What is it all about? It's not a hard, terrible place, but definitely know what is your traits and what are your skills. So what are you truly made out of? Isn't that what you're asking the characters? What are you made out of? Let's see what we're all about.
Yes, it's really it's about resilience, you know, and this whole notion of resilience and being able to gather yourself at the right moment, you know, of peril, and to show yourself and the people around you what you're really made of. And I think that's an important life lesson, you know, that you know, everyone needs to learn.
Well, I think also, too, at the time of a young adult, everybody needs to start asking those questions. We see the transition from high school to college, and kids are saying, well, let's get 2 cell phones. I'll have a backup, because I certainly couldn't be without it. These
right.
things that they're so disconnected from life. And what would happen if your car broke down on the highway? What would happen if maybe you did lose your cell phone? So what would happen if you needed to, quote, be found? So a lot of times, when we have that separate, the 2-system highway against society and reality, if we look at it, that really is about being able to say, what are your plans? Think about these questions ahead of time. What would you do? So Swamped is really, hey, what would you do? Read the book, this is what the characters did in the swamp. What would you do if you went to school and this happened? What would you do if you went out and you were on a highway and this happened? What would happen if you went to the beach or to the swamp and this happened? What would you do? So it's really begging people to ask the questions that we never want to ask because we always think that cavalry's going to come, right?
That's right.
I think that's so important because, in closing, with Hurricane Katrina, everybody thought the cavalry was going to come, and they didn't. And we know from experiences since then, with the Gulf oil spill and other things, the cavalry did not come. In other words, the effects, the things happened. So definitely, too, just as your stories, things did happen to them. But then they eventually did have the cavalry come. They were found. So there is a way for people to say, I can do the best I can, but learn my strengths. What are your strengths? And I think it's a great book of strength, endurance, and perseverance, yes?
And self-reliance, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
For sure, yeah.
Because you got to be able to hang on long enough till the cavalry can get there, so.
Yeah. You never know how much the human body can do until you turn around and you see what's around you. I'm a naturopath here in the South, and people will say to me, I'm not feeling well. I'll say, go out front. Tell me what the plant is growing in your front yard. And they're like, what? And they'll tell me, I'll say, that must be the medicine to whatever's wrong with you, And I tell them this all the time. And, don't ask me where that came up in me, but it's something I've always known, and that's always been embedded in me, too, So I think the idea of let's see what we're made out of and tell our stories of our elders. So, Ken and Hillary, it was a great story, and I think it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful summer read. You definitely can sit down, but it's going to beg a lot of questions about who you are, what you're about, and what you're willing to put into this life. So we thank you so much for sharing this book with us.
Well, thanks
today.
for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Can you share with the listeners how to find out more information about your work? That would be great.
Yes, we're available nationwide, Amazon, Barnes & Noble's, bookshop.org, or check with your local bookstore, and if they don't have it, they'll order it for you. And I also have a website, bayoubro.com, BAYOUBRO.com, and you can find out all kinds of information about the book and how to buy it there.
Very good. And Hillary, you've been working on some movies again?
Yeah, it's a little slow right now with the writer's strike, but we're hoping that everything will be better on the other side of that, and we'll be able to get back to that soon. But yeah, like Uncle Ken said, you guys can. I think if you're local, Barnes & Noble in Metairie has some copies of the book too, and you guys can find me at HillaryWells.com.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Ken and Hillary, for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you with us to take this roll into the swamp in the summer, and the worst time ever to go into the swamp. I'm always like, I want to go on a swamp, I want to go down a pier, but I'm not going to go unless we've had 2 or 3 freezes, and there's been a lot of mosquitoes killed off. Then I'll go.
Don't blame me.
Other than that, my skin cannot take it because that mosquito will find its way into my ear canal, and I know it will just eat me to death.
Oh, no.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a true pleasure.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
If you'd like to find out more information about Ken Wells, Hillary Wells' book called Swamped, please do click on the link on the bottom of today's show page to go directly to their websites for more information. And boy, check out this book. It's absolutely a terrific summer read. And do have it with your younger kids and say, what would you do Ask the questions, because kids these days don't have any survival skills. They don't know anything about their history, and they don't ask any of the questions to be able to say, wow, isn't that awesome? This is a great book to be able to read with your elders also, to be able to say, this is time to be able to roll and tell me your stories, because I want to know before it's all gone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher. Until tomorrow, have a great day.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family, clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page or visit drjeanettegallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.